It's probably best to dig your own lugworm, but here are some from the shop. Generally you'll find these wrapped. These are yellowtail lugs, two sort of varieties really, black lug and blow lug, and this is how they come. They're quite sticky out of the paper, but actually when you throw them on the floor they firm up a bit and they're easier to put on the hook. You've got the head part of it, which is on the right there, that's the bigger bit, and then the tail part there usually gets full up with sand, so you can actually nick that little bit of bait off. So we've got to try and get that onto the hook. Some people just nip off the little bit of the head there. All the good juices and stuff should be contained in the lug. So just nicking the tail part off there. So what you do is you take your hook in your left or your right hand, depending if you're left or right handed, nip that little bit off there. And there are different ways to put the worm on the hook. I'll just show you a basic way is to put the point of the hook directly through the middle of the worm, and then the idea is take your thumb and forefinger and just make sure that that point of the hook doesn't break the outside of the worm, and thread it all the way along over your knot. And you might need to pull both ends of the worm. You see where I'm doing it both ends there, so you just pinch gently, and then with the point of the hook, when you get right to the end, it can either come out the end or just nick it right towards the end, leaving a little bit of a tail after the end of the hook. And that's probably the simplest, easiest way to put a lugworm on the hook. There are a couple of sort of variations you might want to use when you're doing it. If you throw the worm down, it stiffens the worm up, and you can actually find it's easier to run along the shank of the hook. And then on your actual snood, the line that you're putting the worm on, some people put stop knots. You can use sort of power gum and sequins just to stop the worm going up the hook again. But for a worm like that, that's not a bad little bit of bait presentation. I've seen people put twists in the worm as well, and if the worm does blow and you get all the juices and the guts of the worm come out, don't worry too much, that still will attract the fish. So this is a peeler crab. It's not been moving much by the looks of it because those barnacles on its shell. Right, so the way to tell a peeler crab is just, you can pinch one of the leg segments, or you can just have a little look under the shell at that point, and you can see underneath there is a softer second shell developing, and it's that juicy bit underneath the hard part of the crab that we want to use as a bait. It makes for a better hook bait, and that should, this is actually a frozen peeler, but fresh is a lot better than frozen. Take that shell off, and then that's the bit of bait that you're going to want under there. And you've also got, if you turn the crab over, you can work your way through the bits of shell. You can smash the shell by sort of squeezing them with your fingers, you might find that easier. But if you get rid of all the bits of shell, you can pull the legs off, they'll come out at the knuckle there reasonably easy, and those themselves actually have a bit of bait in them as well. So particularly, it's quite a small crab, but if you crush this pincer, you can see underneath there is more bait, and you can use that to tip other baits. You might want to use it on a cocktail with lug, and that itself's not a bad bit of bait either. So you can retain those. They're usually quite expensive crabs as well to buy, and down our way on the south coast I've seen them, £1.50 for big crabs. So do try and get your own if you can during the spring months. There you go, a nice little bit of bait that. There you go, so it just cracks open. That's the bit we want. It's got the legs off there. And then just work your way through the crab. You'll see which bits are hard bits of shell. They should come off quite easily. These little side bits again, just quickly showing you. And when you get round to the other side, you'll see you've got the gills there. and those aren't needed, so those will need to come out. You can pinch those out and they'll come out quite easily, particularly on a frozen one. Failing that, you can just use the scissors and snip those off as well. So I'd suggest legs off. You can keep the legs on. You can have half broken shells on there, but I just really wanted to show you that what a crab looks like. There is a difference between male and female crabs apparently, with a more rounded thorax on the female, and the male one, I think that's a male, it's got a pointed side, and apparently the female crabs are better and catch more fish. Whether that's true or not, I don't know. At this point you could cut the crab in half right through the middle and use it as two separate baits, but what we're going to do here is cut this lungs or gills out. Snip that out, and we'll use this as a single hook crab, and we'll use this all as a single crab. So always match the bait to the hook size, or hook size to the bait. If you're using a single crab like this, I tend to just go through it twice, once on the narrower part of the crab and then through the big part, and then that sort of, it's a little bit more mushy this because it's been frozen. As I say, that's not as good as getting it fresh. And then you wrap that bait up. So I'm using the bait elastic there just to wrap the bait up. Just wrap it round and round and round so you contain as many of those juices as possible. And they're the bits that the bass absolutely love, smooth hound as well. Loads of species will go for a peeler crab. So that's not the best crab, that one, and it's not actually the best presented bait, but you do want to have a little bit of the gape of the hook there proud and the point showing. And you could put two peeler crabs on a single hook. So I think that one there I'm using a 3/0 hook. But that makes an ideal bass bait, that one. Similar to the worm would be a sand eel as well. This would be a dead bait or frozen sand eel. You hook live sand eels slightly different, but this one tend to just nip off the tail section, and that aids with the casting, means it doesn't fly around and spin up like a bit of a helicopter. And for this one, similar to the lugworm, you want it to go right through the middle of the sand eel. And the fresher the sand eel, if you're doing this with a recently dead sand eel, this would be a lot easier because the skin's a bit firmer, and you can actually see they're translucent. So follow the line of the sand eel right the way through onto the hook. See, it's a little bit mushy, this one. And then bring the point of the hook out just before the gill cover of the sand eel. Some people actually cut the heads off. I prefer to keep the heads on. It's got that little trigger point of the eye for predatory fish, and then you want that hook to go through just before the head. And then again, you can use the bait elastic on these as well. Fresh mackerel are a good bait. Frozen, blast frozen, a good second best. This is a frozen bait, but it's been blast frozen. That keeps the skin in a better condition. So you can use a small bit of a tail fillet like that, similar to how you hooked the peeler crab. If you go in with the hook and back out again, the line will run through that little bit of mackerel. And you obviously want the hook point proud, and with something like this, matching it with that size of hook, again a 3/0 hook, I find the best way is something like that, and then plenty of this bait elastic. Start softly and then just get that little bit harder, and if you slightly overlap the wrap as well, that keeps the juices in nicely, keeps it a nice tight bait. It makes it a little bit harder for smaller fish to just sort of nick bits off it as well. And you can use all parts of that mackerel, just keep going and going with the bait elastic. It's a similar thing with squid, running the hook point through if you're just using squid. And with the head of the mackerel, I want the point of the hook here to come out on the tough bit of the head, like the top bit of the head in there, so I slide that in, roll that gape through, and then you're on the tough armoured part of the head. And when you pull the line through, there's a little bit of a twist there. There are loads of different ways of doing the head for mackerel bait, and I'm going to also again rely on the bait elastic here. I'm going to put loads of that round. This is a good autumn bass bait, particularly where people are gutting fish, you know, like from breakwaters and things like that. So you do need quite a bit of bait elastic here to aid that presentation. You can double up on the bait elastic, so 2 strands at the same time. That's just one way of doing the mackerel head. There are loads of different ways. Lots of people have got their favourite way. They'd look at that and say, no, this is how you do it, this is how you do it, blah blah blah. So that should get you up and running with some of the baits that you'll find commonly available in the tackle shop. Plenty of juices here, aren't there? Can't believe I'm doing this in a studio. It's going on, everything going over the lights.